You are ready to go? I'm ready. Subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. Since the United States entered into a civil nuclear cooperation agreement with India in 2005, Pakistan has pressed for a similar arrangement. Pakistan sent a 56-page document to the U.S. officials in 2010, reiterating its request for U.S. support for its civilian nuclear program. Since 2010, U.S. officials have hinted at the possibility of this prospect. U.S. Ambassador to Pakistan Ann Patterson commented at the time that we were, quote, beginning to have a discussion with Islamabad about this issue. She noted that while the U.S. had serious nonproliferation concerns, we're beginning to pass on those. Nothing came out of those discussions. This past October, news outlets suddenly reported that the administration was allegedly revisiting this possibility. Administration officials quickly denied these claims, but this is serious and recurring topic requires more examination. Discussions about a potential nuclear deal could send the wrong message to Pakistan, in my opinion, the Benedict Arnold of American allies. Pakistan crossed the nuclear weapons threshold in 1985 under the direction of the notorious scientist A.Q. Khan. In the very early years of the network, Khan established an extensive clandestine network in order to obtain necessary technologies and materials. Later on, Khan used similar channels to make a profit by selling nuclear designs and materials to other countries. A.Q. Khan network is believed to have sold sensitive nuclear technology to the most unstable countries on the planet. It was the Khan network that allowed North Korea to get its uranium enrichment program up and running. Khan also sold Libya design secrets and nuclear weapons components during the same time. In 1987, Iran admitted to international inspectors that Khan's network provided its scientists with centrifuge specifications and equipment. So we have North Korea, we have Libya, and we have Iran. Pakistani scientists even met with Osama bin Laden in 1998 to discuss how to create a nuclear bomb. The full extent of the network's illicit proliferation remains unknown because Pakistan just won't come clean. Pakistan's ties to terrorists do not end with the discussions about nuclear weapons. Pakistan has a long history of supporting terrorist proxies as a way of increasing its leverage in the region. Pakistan maintains close links with the Afghan Taliban, even allegedly holding direct meetings with senior leaders and coordinating attacks. There is evidence that Pakistan worked closely with al-Qaeda, helping the terrorists move arms and fighters in and out of Afghanistan to kill U.S. troops. In 2011, Admiral Mike Mullen, then chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified before Congress that Pakistan supported numerous terrorist attacks by the Haqqani network in Afghanistan against American troops. What an indictment. One truck bombing at a NATO outpost south of Kabul on September 10, 2011, killed at least 5 people and wounded 77 coalition soldiers. The attack was one of the worst trolls for foreign troops in a single attack in the war. Another Pakistan-supported Haqqani network was an assault on the U.S. Embassy that killed 16 Afghan police officers and civilians. Mullen said, quote, the Haqqani network acts as a veritable arm of the Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence Agency. Meanwhile, Pakistan is among the leading recipients of U.S. foreign assistance post 9/11. Congress has appropriated more than $30 billion in assistance to Pakistan between 2002 and 2015. Instead of talking about the possibility of rewarding Pakistan's with a nuclear deal, we should be enforcing the consequences for Pakistan's bad behavior. It seems ironic to me we keep sending money to Islamabad while Pakistan continues supporting terrorist groups that have killed American troops. This has got to cease. There are more steps in stopping its support for terrorists that Pakistan needs to take before we can even entertain the possibility of some kind of new type of nuclear agreement with them. We should start with disclosing, they should start with disclosing exactly who they have given nuclear technology to. They need to fess up. Pakistan should slow down its rapid production of nuclear weapons. Pakistan already has 110 to 130 nuclear warheads and enough material to bring that total up to 400 to 500. If it continues on its current pace, it will surpass the United Kingdom as the 5th largest nuclear weapons state in the world. A civilian nuclear cooperation agreement would legitimize the Pakistani nuclear weapons program and reward Islamabad for its long history of bad behavior. We've already signed a bad agreement with Iran. We cannot afford to enter into another bad nuclear agreement that would further endanger not just American security, but global security. And that's the way it is. I will now yield to the ranking member from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses who have appeared today. As we consider the issue of possible future civil nuclear cooperation with Pakistan, it's important to keep in mind that no agreement of any kind is on the table or appears very likely in the near future. Recent talks between the United States and Pakistan on this subject seem to be preliminary, and there's little indication at this juncture that Pakistan would agree to the sorts of constraints on the nuclear arsenal on which the United States would insist. Any arrangement allowing for U.S. civilian nuclear cooperation with Pakistan is hypothetical at this point. With that said, Pakistan's security situation and its disputes with India present many serious risks, and I look forward to the testimony today on how best the United States can act to manage these risks. Many analysts view Pakistan's nuclear weapons and the risks that these weapons could fall into the hands of terrorists or be used by Pakistan and an armed conflict with India as one of the world's most dangerous of problems. In addition to being a nuclear-armed state in an extremely dangerous neighborhood, Pakistan presents other difficulties as well. Pakistan has a history of proliferation. The network led by one of the founders of its nuclear program, A.Q. Khan, sold nuclear weapons-related equipment and technology to Iran, Libya, and North Korea. Further, while the United States partners with Pakistan in counterterrorism activities, Pakistan has sometimes failed to tackle, and elements of the government have led even active support to violent extremist organizations such as LET in Kashmir and Haqqani and the network that it organizes in Afghanistan. Perhaps most disturbingly, Pakistan's intelligence service, the ISI, is reported to have provided considerable assistance to LET in planning the November 2008 terrorist attacks in Mumbai that killed 166 people, including 5 U.S. citizens. To be sure, Pakistan is a difficult partner in counterterrorism, just as it can be with respect to counterproliferation. Yet the issues of the security of Pakistan's nuclear arsenal, the prevention of further proliferation of Pakistan's nuclear equipment and technology, and de-escalating nuclear tensions with India are not issues the United States can ignore. We must engage with Pakistan on these critical subjects. I look forward to the information and discussion today of our witnesses and how best we can work with Pakistan and other stakeholders in these issues. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The Chair will recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, for a 1-minute opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was once chairman of this subcommittee. I see the ranking membership is in great hands, but one of the reasons why I moved over to Asia is I believe that the greatest threat we have of the use of nuclear weapons is indeed in South Asia. I don't think that there's any chance that a civil nuclear deal would be approved by Congress, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be talking to the Pakistanis about it. I think our focus should be not to punish Pakistan for the proliferation of the past, but to see if we can get an improvement in Pakistani behavior in the future. Pakistan is the world's only schizophrenic nuclear power. Pakistan doesn't just confuse anyone who studies it. It is, in fact, confused. Just the military elements are simultaneously fighting terrorists on the ground at great cost and supporting terrorists at the same time. And we see India, which needs to be persuaded that if there is a terrorist attack, it cannot respond by pushing its military across the border. And Pakistan, which must be persuaded that no matter what happens with conventional weapons, they cannot cross the line to nuclear and there's no such thing as a small nuclear weapon. So I look forward to the gentleman in front of us telling us how we can easily solve this problem. I yield back.
Without objection, all members will have 5 days to submit statements and questions and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. Without objection, all the witnesses' prepared statements will be made part of this record. I ask that each witness will keep their presentation to no more than 5 minutes. As you probably heard, the bells are ringing. We're voting again. We will adjourn at some appropriate time or recess at some appropriate time so that we can vote. I'll introduce each witness and then give each of you time to summarize your statements.
There's 2 votes. I only voted on 1.
Ambassador Haqqani is a Pakistan scholar and public figure who served as Pakistan's ambassador to the United States from 2008 until 2011. He is widely credited with managing a difficult period of the U.S. and Pakistan relations during the global war on terrorism. Mr. Ambassador, welcome for being here. Dr. Daniel Markey is a senior research professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. Previously, he was a senior fellow for India, Pakistan, and the South Asia at CFR, where he specialized in security and governance issues. Mr. Henry Sukolsky is currently the executive director of the Nonproliferation Policy Executives Education Center. He previously served in the Pentagon as deputy for nonproliferation policy and received a medal for outstanding public service from the Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney. It's good to have you back before our subcommittee. And Dr. George Berkerkovich is vice president for studies at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where he focuses on nuclear strategy, nonproliferation issues, and South Asian security. He's also the author of the prize-winning book, India's Nuclear Bomb. At this time, the subcommittee will be in recess until these series of votes are over. We'll be back, and then we'll get to hear what you have to say about this complex issue. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll be in recess. Another vote. There wasn't but one vote. Did I miss a vote? But there Subcommittee will come to order. For everyone's information, it's my understanding that this series of interruptions will continue for the foreseeable evening. But let's see how far we can go. Mr. Ambassador.
Microphone.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to share with you and members of this committee my views on U.S.-Pakistan relations in general and the civil nuclear cooperation in particular. My written statement is already in front of the committee. Fundamentally, my point is that although the Obama administration and Pakistani officials have both officially stated that formal negotiations are not currently underway for a civil nuclear deal for Pakistan, it is obvious that at least some elements of the current administration think that they can secure change in Pakistan's policies by offering it a nuclear accord along the lines offered to India. It is argued that in return for Pakistan agreeing to restrict its nuclear program to weapons and delivery systems that are appropriate to its actual defense needs against India's nuclear threat, quote, the United States might support an eventual waiver for Pakistan by the 48-nation nuclear suppliers group. Pakistani officials have already said that since they already get their nuclear materials from China, there is no advantage to them of membership of the nuclear suppliers group. The expectation that Pakistan would limit its nuclear arsenal is similar to the unrealistic expectation during the 1980s that supplying Pakistan with large amounts of economic aid and state-of-the-art military equipment, including F-16 aircraft, would lead to Pakistan stopping short of developing nuclear weapons altogether. In my written testimony, you will actually find exact quotes from American officials who at that time reassured and assured Congress several times that support for Pakistan's conventional military buildup was the only way to save Pakistan from going nuclear. And we all know where that led us. The reason why such mistakes have been made, and I've written an entire book on the subject, is because American officials often fail to understand Pakistan's ambitions in South Asia and the policies that follow from those ambitions. If the purpose of Pakistan's development of nuclear weapons had been just to ensure that Pakistan was not overrun by a superior Indian military force, which is a legitimate defense goal, that objective was met by Pakistan's nuclear tests conducted in 1998. Pakistan has refused to abjure first use of nuclear weapons in a conflict, a position similar to that of North Korea, which also claims that it fears being overrun by a superior conventional force. The most likely scenario for nuclear conflict or military escalation on the subcontinent at the moment involves escalation resulting from terrorism of the kind we all witnessed in Mumbai in 2008. Notwithstanding attempts in the United States to sell the prospect of a deal as a restraint on Pakistan's nuclear capabilities, Pakistan's leaders see parity with India as the only reason they should seek a civil nuclear deal with the United States. Ever since the US-India's nuclear deal of 2005, as Mr. Chairman, you pointed out, Pakistan's leaders have sought a similar deal to affirm that the two South Asian neighbors are equal in status and prestige. American readiness to look the other way at Pakistan's conduct, such as support for jihadi terrorists, including the Afghan Taliban and the discovery of Osama bin Laden in a Pakistani garrison town, as well as US willingness to offer aid to Pakistan even without fulfillment of conditionality mandated by Congress on the basis of Secretary of State's waivers, has often ended up as an enabler of Pakistan's dysfunction. I would argue that Pakistan's dysfunction stems from its desire to compete with India. Instead of discussing civil nuclear deals and selling more military equipment to Pakistan, US officials should convince Pakistan that its ambitions of rivaling India are akin to Belgium trying to rival France or Germany. India's population is 6 times as large as Pakistan's, while India's economy is 10 times bigger and growing. India's $2 trillion economy has managed consistent growth, whereas Pakistan's $245 billion economy has grown sporadically and is undermined by jihadist terrorism and domestic political chaos. Pakistan also continues to depend on Islamist ideology through its school curricula, propaganda, and Islamic legislation to maintain internal nationalist cohesion, which inevitably encourages extremism and religious intolerance. It must be understood that, like all nations, Pakistan has a right to defend itself, and nobody denies it that right. Pakistan's concern about resolution of the dispute over Jammu and Kashmir also deserves attention, albeit by peaceful means. But Pakistan's security needs should be judiciously examined. Unlike other countries, Pakistan did not raise an army to match the threats it faces. Pakistan inherited 33% of British India's army, raised for the Second World War at independence in 1947, and has sought to identify threats that match the size of that army. Pakistan is the 6th largest nation in the world by population, but only 26th by size of GDP on purchasing power parity basis, and 42nd in nominal GDP. It has the world's 6th largest nuclear arsenal and 8th largest army, but performs poorly in most non-military indices. Pakistan's literacy rate stands at 52%, and the country has one of the highest percentage of out-of-school children in the world. The military and intelligence services that dominate Pakistani national security decision-making have sacrificed their country's prosperity and progress in their relentless pursuit of military competition with India. Forcing New Delhi's hand on Kashmir has become more important than educating Pakistan's children. Since the 1950s, US policy has ended up nurturing Pakistan's military and keeping alive its dream of parity with India. It is
Summarize your comments, Mr. Ambassador. We have a long way to go. Your statements are in the record. Summarize your final comments.
My final comment is that raising the prospect of a civil nuclear deal with Pakistan without addressing the country's dysfunction and militarism will aid neither US policy objectives nor the people of Pakistan, who are perhaps the biggest victims of their national elites' erroneous policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Dr. Markey, you have 5 minutes.
Chairman Poe, Ranking Member Keating, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify about the potential ramifications of a civil nuclear agreement with Pakistan. Obviously, this has already been submitted for the record, so I'll give some brief remarks now. Let me jump right to my bottom line. A nuclear deal of the sort that's reportedly being discussed with Pakistan is hardly the blockbuster that some commentators in the media would have us believe. It is less than meets the eye. Even so, discussions of a nuclear deal are poorly timed, and pursued further would be more likely to prove counterproductive to other near-term security interests than to deliver significant benefits. Now, in the abstract, I can imagine a good nuclear deal with Pakistan, and we should expect that diligent and creative American diplomats are exploring various options for securing and limiting the expansion of Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. And if, as some analysts propose, Pakistan could be encouraged to commit to important limits on its nuclear program, then U.S. policymakers would have more and better reasons to think seriously about ways we could bring Pakistan into the world's nuclear order. But I don't think that Washington or Islamabad is actually ready to have serious conversations along these lines. I see no indication that Pakistan's military leadership is inclined to place voluntary limits on the growth of its nuclear arsenal. That arsenal has always been justified as a deterrent against Indian aggression, and Indo-Pakistani relations are stuck in hostility. India, as a rising power, is expanding its military. This will continue because India competes not only with Pakistan, but also with China. Any Indian military sized to deal with Pakistan alone would be insufficient to defend against China, while any program sized to deal with China would pose a menacing threat to Pakistan. And because Pakistan uses its nuclear program to make up for India's superior conventional military power, the chances of Islamabad accepting nuclear caps while India's military grows are slim. In sum, this triangular security dilemma between China, India, and Pakistan, or maybe even quadrilateral security dilemma if you include the United States, is a structural dynamic that favors persistent competition, most of all by the weakest player, that is Pakistan. Now, even if Pakistan were to take incremental steps to limit the future growth of its nuclear program, I suspect, and I think the comments already made here today, reinforce the notion that that would not be sufficient reason for the United States to champion Pakistan's mainstreaming in the global nuclear order. Placing limits on future nuclear growth would do too little to address our current concerns about Pakistan's nuclear arsenal, and that arsenal poses significant and serious threats including that of insider theft, onward proliferation, accident, sabotage, or unauthorized use. So in other words, I doubt our own ability or our interest in delivering on even limited diplomatic benefits that Pakistan would expect if it committed to slowing or stopping the growth of its arsenal, which I already said it's unlikely. Now, worst of all, the nuclear discussion shifts attention away from the other issues that worry us in Pakistan. Now, at present, the U.S. State Department has trouble certifying that Pakistan's military has targeted the Haqqani network that has so viciously attacked U.S., Afghan, Indian, and coalition partners in Afghanistan. And U.S. officials do not believe that Pakistan has seriously tried to go after Lashkar-e-Taiba, the terrorist group responsible for Mumbai. Now, several other pressing issues also deserve more attention in the U.S.-Pakistan dialogues than does a nuclear deal. To start, Washington needs Islamabad's commitment to advance any hope of a reconciliation process with the Afghan Taliban, again, an unlikely thing, but something that is currently an essential pillar in the Obama administration's war termination strategy in Afghanistan. And relations between Pakistan and India are also troubled. U.S. officials would be smart, I think, to encourage a resumption of their formal and back-channel dialogues, if principally as a tactic to forestall nuclear future crises. And I was happy to see the news just this past week of NSA-led level talks in Bangkok between India and Pakistan. And Washington also has much to discuss with Pakistan about the state of its own counterterror and counterinsurgency operations inside Pakistan, from its tribal areas to its major urban centers. Now, if these short-term agenda items were somehow exhausted, Pakistan's current condition raises other fundamental questions about its long-term relationship with the United States. Its fragile economy, its troubled civil-military relations, its bloody sectarian cleavages, anti-U.S. prejudices all inhibit trust-based partnership. In sum, this is a big country in an important location with nearly insurmountable challenges at home and with its neighbors. And my concern is that by turning senior-level attention to a nuclear deal, Washington sends a wrong and counterproductive message to Pakistan, as we have in the past. We're too likely to come across as distracted, unable to set and maintain priorities, and suffering from unfounded expectations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Markey. Mr. Sukolski, 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Keating, thank you for inviting me to testify today. I ask that in addition to my testimony, one 2-page addition be entered into the record, if that's okay.
Without objection.
Thank you. I'd like to focus on 2 points. First, why offering Pakistan civilian nuclear incentives is self-defeating. A second, why implementing Title V of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Act of 1978, which calls for non-nuclear cooperation and energy assessments for developing states, would make more sense. Several U.S. analysts recently championed offering Pakistan civilian nuclear incentives like those we've extended to India. They argue the U.S. could offer Pakistan a 1-2-3 agreement, as it did for India, or sponsor Pakistan's entry into the nuclear suppliers group, as it's now trying to do with India. This would enable Islamabad to acquire nuclear supplier group-controlled nuclear goods and a portion of the equal treatment that it seeks. Short of NSG membership, they argue, the U.S. might push the NSG to waive restrictions on NSG-controlled exports to Pakistan, something the NSG has already done at Washington's urging for India. This line of thinking appears to have been behind the administration's recent talks with Pakistani officials. In the end, however, no deal was cut. This should not be surprising. First, offering civilian nuclear incentives to moderate Pakistan's nuclear posture is diplomatically risky. Pakistan and China may object to the U.S. pushing for India's membership in the NSG, but trying to address their concerns by offering Pakistan NSG membership or an NSG waiver is not only certain to upset India, but Pakistan, which demands being treated in an identical fashion with India. This, though, would require sealing a formal nuclear cooperative agreement that would upset India even more and cause a possible backlash here on the Hill. It would also likely prompt Israel to ask for similar treatment, which in turn would complicate nuclear restraint efforts in the Middle East. Second, it undermines nuclear restraint. The U.S. tried trading civilian nuclear incentives with India in 2008. Washington persuaded the NSG to allow India to import uranium for its civilian nuclear program. Yet this has only allowed India to dedicate more of its meager domestic uranium production to military purposes. Bizarrely, then, our peaceful nuclear initiative with India now is enabling India to make more bombs. Thus, Chairman Corker of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee recently noted that his vote in favor of the deal back in 2008 was a mistake, that it has only undermined international nuclear restraint. Certainly, Pakistan's military would benefit no less from access to internationally available advanced nuclear technology and goods. Finally, nuclear power is a poor form of energy assistance. The USAID, the World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank, institutions dedicated to upgrading Pakistan's energy system, have all focused on non-nuclear projects. These include Pakistan's electrical distribution system. Only roughly half of Pakistanis are able to connect to the central grid, reforming the financial management of its utilities, which continually fail to collect payment for electricity supplied, increasing energy efficiency. Pakistan's rating is among the world's worst, and preventing electrical theft, which accounts for a disturbing percentage of the electricity consumed. Increasing utilization of natural gas, hydropower, solar, and wind resources, of which Pakistan has a considerable amount, and development of gas and oil pipelines. These outfits understand what several detailed energy assessments have determined. Nuclear power can only supply a small fraction of Pakistan's electrical needs and is extremely expensive. By now, we should all know this. Much of New Delhi's nuclear weapons program was a direct result of Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program. I note this is the 62nd anniversary today of that program. India's first bomb came from plutonium produced in a Canadian reactor, moderated with U.S.-supplied heavy water, reprocessed in a U.S.-designed plant. India promised material to be strictly used for peaceful purposes. The rest is history. Recently, though, we compounded matters with the 2008 India nuclear deal. We need to stop pushing such deals. At a minimum, Congress should demand that the executive implement Title V of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Act, which calls for non-nuclear cooperation and energy assessments with developing states. Much of this work is currently done by AID, but not under the Act. The Act calls for country-specific assessments, annual reports, and the creation of a non-nuclear energy Peace Corps. Unfortunately, it has never been implemented. After 37 years and the recent events regarding Pakistan, Congress should hold a hearing and find out why. Thank you.
And Dr.
Thank you, Chairman Poe and Ranking Member Keating. I won't repeat what my colleagues have said, and I agree with much of it. And fundamentally, there's not going to be a nuclear deal like was reported in the press for reasons that my colleagues have mentioned. But I think that the very idea and the discussion that we're having is useful because it allows us and you to elucidate and think through some of the issues that are involved. I would begin by saying that the proliferation damage done by the Khan network is an enormous fact. It's an enormously important fact. But at some point, the question then arises whether and when to learn from this fact and try to create new facts that are more propitious. Because if we have the status quo, what happened in the past, and that becomes the future, it's not anything that any of us would welcome. Now, one way to deal with it is to propose new punishments to try to change Pakistan's behavior, but I'm not aware of anybody who suggests doing that over nuclear policy in Pakistan today, in part because Pakistan's actions to secure its nuclear arsenals and cooperate with the U.S. and the Department of Energy in that domain, which is very important for counterterrorism, has largely been positive. So what we're most worried about now is actually the expansion and future growth of the Pakistani nuclear arsenal and the implications of that for stability. So the question then is, what can and should be done to motivate Pakistan to continue to improve its controls over nuclear materials and facilities, and also to limit the growth of its nuclear arsenal? One answer is to just continue to isolate Pakistan and not deal with them. And that could go on forever as a policy. Indeed, that's the implication of a number of policies that we're practicing. The problem with that is obvious, which is if Pakistan's facing that forever, what incentives do they have to change the course they're on? So another answer is to try to offer Pakistan ways to end its isolation by building international confidence that it's managing its nuclear program to standards comparable to those of other nuclear-armed states, and that it's going to limit its nuclear forces. I think that's the objective that the Obama administration reportedly pursued, and for reasons that we've talked about, Pakistan's not going to agree to that. Now, there's another way that you could begin to pursue these objectives, and that would be to convey that no states that possess nuclear weapons outside of the Nonproliferation Treaty, so that means Israel, India, and Pakistan, none of those states would be offered membership in the Nuclear Suppliers Group without having met criteria that the NSG would have established. And those criteria, at a minimum, would deal with the security of nuclear facilities and materials, but also could cover the non-expansion of nuclear arsenal. These NSG criteria would be established, and so only states that met those criteria could be admitted, but it also would mean that any state that did get admitted, such as India, wouldn't be able to then block any other state forever from joining, because the Nuclear Suppliers Group operates by consensus. Once India's in, as Obama's proposing, they can block Pakistan forever. And that's, in a sense, an incentive for unwelcome behavior in Pakistan. Now, my colleagues have talked about some of the reasons that Pakistan won't agree, actually, to any of the things that could plausibly be proposed. I agree with all that. The fundamental issue is that Pakistan insists upon having what India has. And Ambassador Haqqani's written books on this. His testimony is elucidating on this. And the problem here is that the nuclear deal that we made with India puts no limits on India's strategic nuclear capabilities. There's no limits on its fissile material production for weapons. There's no limits on the growth of its nuclear arsenal. There's no limits on its missile program and trajectory. And because of those reasons, the Pakistanis say, well, we want that, but the United States is never going to agree to no limitations in such an arrangement, and never the twain shall meet. So the only way to get at this problem is what Dan alluded to, is you would need a process with China, with India, with Pakistan, and the U.S., all of us dealing with not only our nuclear and missile programs, but new programs like conventional prompt global strike, the whole array of conventional and nuclear weapons that drive all of these players in this multifaceted competition. Anything less than that is not going to actually get the kind of limitations the administration is seeking. Thank you.
Thank you all for all of the information, valuable information, and of course your statements are, official statements are part of the record. I will say this at the outset, many members may have questions in writing that will be submitted to you. They are not in attendance, but look forward to, during the holidays, of answering some of those questions and sending them back to us. I'll start and yield myself 5 minutes for questions. Dr. Markey, what is the name of the terrorist organization responsible for the Mumbai terror attack?
Lashkar-e-Taiba?
And are they in Pakistan?
I believe so, yeah.
How big are they?
Thousands.
And has Pakistan done anything to hold them accountable for that attack?
Not nearly as much as we'd like.
What have they done, briefly?
In brief, what they...
Nobody's been arrested, have they?
Well, yes, they have, but weren't kept locked up. I think what they've done is they've tried to put a lid on LET, on its operations, particularly any operations that would cross into India, and to, they would claim, that is, try to keep their violent activities to a minimum. But what they haven't done, and what is quite obvious to anybody watching, is keep a lid on LET's leadership, or keep it out of the media, and keep it from organizing, and from conducting large-scale rallies in major Pakistani cities that Indians, of course, and others see as profoundly troubling.
Question regarding nuclear proliferation. We talked about what Pakistan, I've mentioned about Pakistan helping North Korea, Iran, and Libya develop nuclear weapon capability. What about currently? Are they still sort of a rogue nation helping deliver any type of nuclear capability to anyone, terrorist organizations or nation states? Yes, sir. Mr. Skoliski.
The big question is, what connection, if any, will they possibly have in the future to Saudi Arabia? And pundits love to say, well, it'll never happen, and pundits love to say it will happen. We don't know.
So there's that possibility.
There is.
And if we agree to this type of nuclear agreement with Pakistan, who is, I don't think, an ally of the United States, then allies of the United States, such as Israel, will want the same deal. Is that correct? Is that what you said, Mr. Sokolsky?
It's a problem. I used to work for a man who just died, Harry Rowan. He was Assistant Secretary of Defense, had to deal with these problems. He always said that whenever he talked with Indians about, and they bring up the topic of nuclear reactors or rockets, he would try to change the subject. Very good counsel. I think changing the subject here is important. In the case of Pakistan, one of the things they want is equality at some level, or recognition of their nuclear systems. One of the things we probably would have to do if we want to try to moderate their posture is think about some limit that we could enter into as well as them. One such thought having to do with Saudi Arabia is perhaps it's time that we agree not to send nuclear weapons on other countries' soil beyond what we've already done to any additional countries, and they should agree to do so as well. I actually brought this up with some Pakistani generals. They were very excited about the idea. That was some time ago. We should take it up again, I think.
What is the effect of our continuing to give foreign aid, military reimbursement to Pakistan? I understand they're in the top 5 of all the countries that we give foreign aid to. Has that done anything to bring Pakistan, their rogue activities, whether it's support of terrorism or anything else, to the table to deal candidly with the United States? Ambassador?
Simple answer is no. There have been some half-hearted and insufficient measures. Right after 9/11, General Musharraf promised a complete turnaround. You might recall that at that time, the administration believed that Pakistan had turned around, only to find a few years later that support for Afghan Taliban was continuing. Later on, of course, one faction of the Afghan Taliban, the Haqqani network, became the big issue. The problem there is that Pakistan's own view of its national interest prompts it in acting very differently from what it says that it will do to the United States, which are commitments it has to make to Washington primarily to keep getting that aid. So I have, in many of my writings, argued that in effect, that aid serves as a subsidy to Pakistan for bad policies that the United States thinks it wants to have changed.
One question, just yes or no. Should the United States reevaluate its commitment to sending $1 billion approximately a year to Pakistan?
Yes, it should reevaluate. And the reevaluation should be based on Pakistan's actual needs. Pakistan's real needs right now are not more military. Pakistan already has the world's 8th largest military, but 48% of Pakistan's school-going age children don't go to school. So if American money was to be sent to Pakistan to help Pakistan, it should be directed as though at those 48% school children, not at the Pakistani military. Unfortunately, money is fungible. That's why Congress, in its Enhanced Partnership with Pakistan Act, made it very clear that the military should no longer control decision-making, because then that enables the military to get the money diverted to itself. Unfortunately, the provisions of the Enhanced Partnership with Pakistan Act have all been subjected to waivers rather than to the certification that Congress desired.
Thank you, Ambassador. I yield the 5 minutes to the ranking member from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating.
Well, thank you. We have another roll call. I don't want to have you come back for another series, so I'm going to ask you to be very brief, but a couple of things. We were just approaching this, Ambassador. You wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal, and you know what it is, obviously. But I want to ask you, in a sense, you're saying part of the problem with Pakistan is the delusion that it's the equal of India. What's the U.S. doing to add to that delusion? What should we be doing to change that delusion?
In all Pakistani attempts at getting a strategic calculus, there is always an assumption that they will continue to have military assistance from the United States in one form or another. So military assistance from the United States makes Pakistan think that it can actually qualitatively compete with the United States, although that is becoming increasingly difficult with American military equipment being available to India as well. Previously, it was not, especially during the Cold War. But I think that military assistance does lead to that delusion, number one. Number two, on almost all occasions, the administration in particular tries to always try and assuage Pakistani feelings whenever something happens in India-US relations.
Yeah,
I think both those things need to change.
Let me just comment quickly, too. If we were ever, hypothetically, to do a negotiation, sounds very naive, but who are we really dealing with in Pakistan? Is it the ISI? Who's making the decisions?
It's the Pakistani military, which also controls the ISI. And unfortunately, the military always uses the excuse that the civilians are there, so it negotiates with the civilians when the military doesn't want a deal. But when the military does want something to be decided, they come to you directly. And unfortunately, that's something that you have encouraged by talking to both separately, not insisting on civilian control of military institutions, as was provided for in the Enhanced Partnership with Pakistan Act.
Yeah, I also think that at the nucleus of a lot of these issues is the fact that Pakistan, to be a modern and thriving country, to compete with the countries they want to compete with, they have to get control of their own economy and their own revenue. We've been there. I know the chair has been there. I've been there. The revenue system there is incapable of supporting any kind of modern economy. Now, don't you think before we're talking about these other issues or to not deal with these issues, we can't even really begin to talk about the issues that are the center point of this hearing? I honestly think that's the starting point there. And you touched upon it with the aid we have. So could anyone comment on that? To me, that seems the primary issue.
Basically, aid has become a substitute for revenue in Pakistan. Pakistan has one of the worst tax GDP ratios of any country in the world. And although every few years, when the American direct aid is less in quantum, and the IMF is dealing with Pakistan, the IMF always insists on Pakistan enhancing its tax base, but it's almost never done. And for strategic considerations, which basically means Pakistan is too big to fail, so therefore let's bail them out, those considerations are always set aside.
I'm reminded in our own country, the former chair of the Joint Chiefs, General Dempsey, at the end of his nomination process, he was asked what was the most important issue for the U.S. security and military, and he said our economy. And I think this holds true here. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We'll be in recess for another vote, and as soon as that vote's over, we will resume this hearing. Thank you for your
Mr.
patience.
Chairman, would you object if I ask questions while you gentlemen are voting? Because I voted on this CAPS motion.
I'll need to be here when you do it, so we won't be gone long.
Okay. I'm ready to go, yeah. Good, thanks.
The subcommittee will come to order, and now you can see why American foreign policy is right on target every time. There you go. And I now call on my good friend from California, Mr. Sherman, for his questions.
Address this one to Ambassador Khani, but others can chime in as well. There's always been some dispute between Shiites and Sunnis in Pakistan. As I understand it, General Bhutto was a Shiite at a time when that did not preclude him from leading Pakistan. There is cooperation sometimes between Iran and Pakistan. At the same time, you see a lot, an intensification of Shiite Sunni terrorist acts in Karachi. Worldwide, the split between Shiites and Sunnis has gotten considerably deeper as the Alawite in Damascus has killed at least 200,000 Sunni Muslims. Is it politically difficult for Islamabad to cooperate with Tehran given the worldwide intensification of the split between the Shiites and the Sunnis?
The short answer to the last part of your question, Congressman, is that yes, it is difficult for Pakistan to cooperate with Tehran, although that hasn't stopped individuals within the Pakistani government or different branches of the government from cooperating. Shias constitutes 15% of Pakistan's population, but relations between Shias and Sunnis generally have not been bad since independence. The founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, was Shia. Many members of Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's government were Shia. General Yahya Khan, who was one of Pakistan's several military dictators, was Shia. This is a recent phenomenon in the last 20, 30 years. It has evolved as a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran that has resulted in sectarian killings in Pakistan. The good part of it, of course, is that still we don't see a bloodbath between Sunnis and Shias in towns where they live together. And as far as policies are concerned, Pakistan has generally tended to side with Saudi Arabia rather than Iran on most questions.
But on proliferation issues, has Pakistan cooperated with Iran?
Well, the AQ Khan network certainly supplied
Yes.
designs and equipment to Iran, although the Pakistani government took the position that those were unauthorized.
Yes. Pakistan, 72% Punjabi. Correction, the military is 72% Punjabi. The country's about 54% Punjabi, and I would assume the officer corps is more than 72%, and the generals probably far more than that. Does this cause dissatisfaction among the other ethnic groups in Pakistan, and does that pose a risk for the military? Do you see the military perhaps changing and making a point of bringing in Sunnis, Sindhis, and Baluch and Mohar and other into the military?
The makeup of the Pakistan army in particular it has changed very little since independence, because it was based on British government's martial racist theory. They basically thought that certain ethnic groups were more martial than others, and they precluded groups such as the Sindhis from joining the military. Now, even if they make an attempt to try and have the army reflect the ethnic makeup of the country, it would take many, many years before a Sindhi who joins as a second lieutenant now, or a Baloch who joins as a second lieutenant now, that he'll have a shot at becoming a general. Pakistan has not had a single Sindhi general ever in its history, and it has had only one Baloch 3-star general in its history.
Not even a 1-star Sindhi? Wow.
Not that I know of, sir.
Gotcha. That's And you say even if the Pakistani army tried to open up to these, it would take them a long time. Are they trying?
They say that they are, but we all know that on a lot of occasions and on a lot of subjects, what they say is not what's happening on ground.
We cooperate with Pakistan in a variety of different categories. Does it make sense to compartmentalize our relationship on nuclear issues and keep that separate from our relationship on other issues, for example, terrorism?
Personally, I think that it does not make sense for the simple reason that all cooperation feeds into what I call Pakistan's military's delusion of equality, and not equality in a principled sense, but equality in a weapon system for weapon system sense, which is not easy to do for a country as poor as Pakistan and as small as
They view
Pakistan.
themselves as the military equal of the United States, of India. What is of India? Yeah.
But I'm sure that my colleagues here would like to or would have some opinion on this matter as well, because there are many people who think that nuclear issues can be compartmentalized from other issues, and I think it will be fair to
Let's hear from Dr. Markey on that.
I think that you have to be careful about the question of linkage across all of these issues. And, you know, there is the Pakistan that we wish it would be, and it's nothing like the Pakistan that really is. And the Pakistan that is a Pakistan that is deeply troubling. It's also a Pakistan that could be significantly worse. And so we're always caught in this situation of just what kind of risk do we want to run. With respect to stovepiping nuclear issues, there's certainly the issue of just how sensitive they are, and there's also the issue of sort of technical aspects, which leads them necessarily to this kind of stovepiped area that is separate from others. But with respect to how they fit into our broader concerns, I think it's typically been the case that U.S. policymakers have placed them at the top of our list, and yet have seen that our ability to reach in and do anything about it serious, and that is, you know, a lot of the topic that we are here to discuss today, our ability to actually change their nuclear policy is very, very limited.
Dr. Perkovich?
I think you have to be prepared to separate the issues and treat them separately, especially when there's an opportunity to do something constructive, and there it would be self-defeating to link. And just do the thought experiment. We're very concerned about terrorism, for example. So if there were a new al-Qaeda in Pakistan and we were aware of it and stuff, and all of a sudden they were prepared to cooperate with us, we would do what it would take to facilitate that, regardless of whether they improve their tax collection or whatever else they're doing. And so on nuclear policy, both from the standpoint of securing materials and facilities against terrorism, or in a crisis where you're worried about a nuclear war with India, that becomes front and center, and you deal with that as you have to, and you forsake linkage. So I think, you know, we shouldn't be naive about the need to do that. We did try. It's not exactly correct to say nuclear's always risen to the top, and Henry knows this very well as well. When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, for very understandable reasons, beginning 1979 throughout the 1980s, the U.S. put nonproliferation to the side and put driving the Soviets out of Afghanistan as their #1 priority, and so didn't exercise all of the leverage or even the legal authorities that it had at the time to pressure Pakistan on nonproliferation. We don't need to relitigate that. There was a good reason to do it, but it hasn't always been the case that nuclear is the most pressing issue.
Thank you very much, and as I am in the chair, I will yield myself whatever time is necessary. First and foremost, let me just note that I have had a long relationship with Pakistan and with that part of the world. I was probably elected as Pakistan's best friend in Congress, and I will have to say that during the 1980s, I was involved with Pakistan at the highest level in terms of supporting the Mujahideen fight against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. Even then, there was reasons for concern. The lion's share of the supplies that we provided for the Mujahideen went to Hekmatyar Gulbuddin. And the ISI, which is the intelligence unit in there and their military intelligence in Pakistan, intentionally gave those the most radical of the elements the most of the weapons and supplies that we were providing. I found that even then to be upsetting and not thinking in terms of the long run, except I had assumed that because the ISI military people I was working with were all clean-shaven and looked like British officers, that they were not radicals. I think I made a mistake. And so after the Soviet Union was eliminated from Afghanistan, which I'm proud to have played a part in that effort, the Taliban, there was a period of chaos, and the Taliban emerged. Why did the Taliban take power? Taliban took power because the people in Pakistan set it up and organized and supported and supplied the Taliban so that they and then cut a deal with the Saudis to finance the Taliban, and thus the people of Afghanistan had radicalism, Taliban version shoved down their throats, and started this whole cycle that has been so damaging. Let me note after that, after 9/11 and all the way up until 9/11, the Pakistani ISI was deeply involved in supporting the Taliban and thus terrorism throughout the region and throughout the world. And after 9/11, yes, I'm told that the Pakistanis became very cooperative. I don't know the details about that. I would assume they were cooperative at some point, because we were at that point willing to really do some damage to people who were getting in our way of seeking revenge for the slaughter of 3,000 Americans on 9/11. However, during that same period of the greatest height in our concern, the Pakistani government saw fit to give safe haven to Osama bin Laden. First of all, is there anyone on the panel who believes that the high-level Pakistani authorities did not know that Osama bin Laden was in their country? Is there anyone there who could say, no, they didn't know, we got to give them the benefit of the doubt? No, I've never met anybody willing to say that. And then, of course, since Osama bin Laden was brought to justice, we have Dr. Afridi, the man who helped us bring him to, he has been arrested by the Pakistani government and thrown into a dungeon. And to me, that is an insult, an intentional insult to the American people who have just seen our people slaughtered, but they're not going to, they're going to do harm to the person who helped us bring to justice the murderer of our people. So all of those things lead me kind of to think that maybe the Pakistan that I was supporting during the Cold War, because they were supporting the United States, that was either a really bad decision on my part back then, or we have evolved into a situation where Pakistan was once a friend and is now an enemy. And I will let you guys comment on that, but let me note, one of our greatest adversaries now in the world, not an enemy of ours, but an adversary, is China. And it's not Russia anymore. I mean, Russia is, a lot of people want to have Russia as our enemy again, but it isn't. As compared to China, is our adversary, possibly enemy, and Pakistan's government is what? Trying to have as close a relationship to China as they can. And that leaves us then with what other analysis can they, we're talking about nuclear materials here today. We've got a country with all of that background, and we have to ask ourselves, do they deserve our trust for a civilian nuclear program? And I'm going to let each one of you answer that question, but I want to leave one last item on the table, and that is the Pakistani government has to be judged on what they have done and why they have done their things. Those things that I just outlined are damaging to the security of the United States and the peace of the world. But what they are doing, it seems to me, to their own people, the Baluch, the Sindhis, Christians, is unforgivable and unconscionable, and we have let it ride. We've just let it slide. We continue giving them weapon systems that are used to destroy Baluch villages. We give them weapons that, instead of being used against the Taliban, are being used against people in their own country who oppose their government. And I think that's something that all of these things are important considerations. So let me ask the panel. Number one, none of you decided that to say that Pakistan probably didn't know that Osama bin Laden was there. So let me just ask right down the line, does the Pakistani government today deserve our trust when it comes to this nuclear development? To start, if you could just give me about a 30-second answer on that and go right on down the line, that's fine.
Congressman, I have already laid out my views in my written testimony and in 2 books in which I make the point that the focus of Pakistan has been, and American interests and Pakistani interests do not converge. They have not converged for a while. During the Cold War, Pakistan was interested in getting American military and economic assistance to compete with India, and it made some concessions to America in return. The problem is that in Washington, there are always people who are willing to see the Pakistani glass as half full, and they don't see it from the view of the Pakistani people. Pakistan's children don't go to school, or 48% of them don't go to school. The Baluch are being repressed. The Mahajirs in Karachi are being repressed. Sindhis have their own set of complaints. The support of the Taliban has actually resulted in blowback that has disrupted our own society. And one institution, which is the Pakistani military, dominates all others. That is not a healthy situation. American policy should be directed at trying to force or make or convince Pakistan into becoming a normal country where schools run, where electricity is available, where the aspirations of the people are answered, and not just some dream of the military of great conquests, which it hasn't been able to fulfill, except when it's oppressing and repressing its own people.
So the answer was no.
Absolutely. That was a rather long no, but yes, Congressman.
All right,
was.
thank you. And Doctor?
Thank you. I think the question about nuclear negotiations with Pakistan should be judged, the utility of those negotiations should be judged on whether they're realistic and whether they could serve U.S. interests. And I think right now the answer to the first question of realism is no, it's unrealistic on both sides. And at the moment, the answer to the second question is also no.
As I made clear in my testimony, I think it's a bad idea generally to go running around the world with nuclear carrots, particularly in the subcontinent. I would not limit it to Pakistan. I don't think the India deal was a winner either. And it seems to me you can actually make things much worse by playing with this. If you need to negotiate, I would do it on the merits, and I would, as you have laid out, expect performance as a function of what it is you're willing to offer. And I don't think the nuclear area offers very much practically, and it can be really militarily dicey, that is to say, self-defeating. I would stay clear of it.
I don't think these things are done on the basis of trust. If they were, the answer would be a simple no, but they're as your former colleague or governor first in California, I'm a Californian, President Reagan, you know, trust but verify. I would always say distrust and verify. And so that would be the proposition here. And I don't think we're going to have an agreement, so I don't think it's going to be an issue, really.
Well, there are two factors. Number one, we do have the technological capabilities of building nuclear reactors today that will not have the waste left over, like the Iranian reactor will, of producing nuclear weapons. And there's a whole new generation possible of nuclear power plants. So no matter what we would ever do, we should, in fact, it's not just Pakistan, but anyone that we are involved with expanding the realm of nuclear power should be based on the new technology that we, rather than the old technology, because we don't need no leftover material that can be used for nuclear bombs. We don't need that anywhere. So that's number one thought. And let me just suggest that we give hundreds of millions of dollars every year to Pakistan. I would hope that we come to our senses and, number one, treat Pakistan as it deserves to be treated by the decisions they've made that affect us. And all of their recent decisions have been contrary to America's security needs and contrary to the peace of the world. And so I would hope that we would, I would hope that if we make those decisions, that the Pakistani people themselves will understand what's going on, the repercussions of it, and start insisting on people to govern them who are more consistent with these values that we are expressing today. So I would call on my colleagues to join me in eliminating that aid that we're giving to Pakistan, at least until Dr. Afridi is set free, as a sign of good faith to us. And with that, I would recognize my good friend who is almost as outspoken as I am.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, panel, for being here today. I'm really grateful to be here with Congressman Rohrabacher. I appreciate his persistence in regard to the doctor, and that really should be so important for the relationship that we have with Pakistan. Additionally, I appreciate his expertise on nuclear reactors, as we just heard, and so that's just very helpful. My association and appreciation of South Asia is that my dad served in the Flying Tigers during World War II, and of all things, even Dana doesn't know this, but he departed by boat, of all things, from Miami, Florida, went through the Suez Canal in 1944, and landed at Karachi, and then went to service to protect the people of China and South Asia. So I'm just very grateful with that background. And then I had the opportunity to actually see a remarkable effort of cooperation, the earthquake relief in Muzaffarabad, where American and Pakistani military worked together, and there was a field hospital set up for female doctors to serve the injured female citizens of that region. It was a remarkable situation of which I had hoped the people of Pakistan would see the hopes that we have for their country. And then finally, a remarkable opportunity that I had that is very sad in retrospect. Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto visited my home community of Lexington, South Carolina, and was a speaker at a dinner there for a local medical foundation. She made such a great impression. My wife was so impressed. Sadly, I was at her home in December 2007 and had breakfast, and 10 days later she was assassinated. So it just is heartbreaking to think, and then Ambassador, for you to keep citing correctly the lack of education. That just breaks your heart for a country that should be doing well. Putting that in mind, Ambassador, would cooperation with the U.S. be valuable enough for Pakistan for it to consider joining the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty?
While it would be in Pakistan's interest to consider all options of joining nuclear restraint regimes, because very frankly, the pursuit of nuclear competition will not necessarily be in Pakistan's interest, I do not see that happening. The opposition to the joining the Non-Proliferation Treaty, as well as the CTBT, has been very entrenched, and so far Pakistan's establishment, as it's called, the Pakistani military and the intelligence service, have shown no interest in encouraging participation in those restraint regimes.
And I appreciate you pointing out that it would certainly be in the interest of the people, actually be in the interest of the military, the government, whatever. But thank you for raising that. And Mr. Sokolsky, with the three pillars of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, NPT, being nonproliferation, disarmament, and the right to peacefully use nuclear technology, is it wise for the United States to enter into a 1, 2, 3 agreement with countries that cannot agree to these basic tenets?
The three pillars you refer to is a doctrine that was promoted first by the Italians and the South Africans. It's not really in the treaty or even in the negotiating record, but just taking it nonetheless. I think in general, you have to have standards for the NPT to mean anything, and we have been backing away from those standards too steadily over the last, I'd say, 20 years. The key one, and I think a lot on the panel will agree on this, was the India deal. I think that was a step backwards. So we're a little bit on our back heels right now. But you do want to insist on certain restraints that I don't think Pakistan will agree to.
And thank you for your insight. And for any of you or all of you, currently the Pakistani civilian nuclear program consists of 3 operational reactors, and we know that they have already entered into a 1-2-3 agreement with the Chinese. Is the nuclear energy market in Pakistan large enough to be attractive to the U.S. nuclear industry?
I'd like to take that. Most of the money that those reactors cost is financed by China. Without that financing, there would be no construction. So it's a negative market. In other words, you don't sell the reactors so much as the financing. And I don't think that's a market that, I mean, I would hesitate to speak on behalf of the industry, but I doubt they're interested in going in.
And to me, that's very unfortunate. Well, go ahead, please, Dr. Perkovich.
Just to add, Henry's right, and I think for your thinking about this too, there is no vendor other than the Chinese who would seek to build nuclear power plants in Pakistan for the reasons that Henry mentioned. They're not going to get paid. Pakistan doesn't have the money, and it's not a secure enough environment. Now, one of the problems that raises is that's why the incentive that would be offered to the Pakistanis to control their nuclear program, if it's, we'll sell you nuclear power plants, it's not really an incentive because they know they can't buy these plants either. And so it's another reason why this kind of deal won't actually work.
Well, that's disappointing because I know in my home state of South Carolina, over 60% of all electrical generation is clean, green nuclear. And it's enabled us to compete with the rest of the world in terms of manufacturing and living standards. And I just hope that something can be done to address the extraordinary issue of reliable electrical generation for the people of Pakistan, and whatever that is, I'm happy to try to back each of you up.
Last night, or I guess 2 nights ago, one does research before they come here, I hope, and I did. So what do? You go on Google. And I plugged in USAID, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and I put in electrical generation, and what I got was really very disturbing. What you got were IG reports on all of the fraud associated with the aid that had been expropriated by the Pakistanis in ways that you couldn't even get to, well, what were we trying to do? When you got to the 3rd page of the entry, you were able to see that USAID is trying to do a lot of sensible things, so is the Asian Bank. But it's all non-nuclear, and as I explained in the testimony, there are good reasons for that. It has to do with the expense and the availability of things like natural gas. So it's certainly something to hope for, but it certainly is not something to start with. I think that's sort of the basic point. And the good governance question overrides all economic questions there. I mean, it's quite obvious. It's just embarrassing that we have to see IG reports before you get to what USAID wants to tell you. You know, it was a whole page of them. It was very disheartening.
Well, thank you for your research. Thank you, each of you, for your insight.
Well, thank you. Joe has been, Congressman Wilson has been a wonderful person to work with over the years, and he takes this job very seriously, as we all do. And this issue today, I think, it should crystallize in our minds what we're dealing with in terms of Pakistan. Can we trust the Pakistani government to engage with us in a deal concerning nuclear power? And if we can't, which is what I'm understanding today, and which would my common sense tells me, why are we then giving so much aid, providing military equipment to a government, a regime that we can't even trust to deal with a civilian electricity through nuclear energy program? We need to reassess. The time is far past when we should have made the decision. But today we need to make the decision of reassessing our strategic position with Pakistan, trying to push them in the right direction by letting them know there are consequences to bad behavior and behavior that hurts other people. And so with that said, I appreciate your testimony, the insights you've given us today. Appreciate Mr. Wilson Congressman Wilson being with us today, and of course, Judge Poe for calling this hearing. With that said, this hearing is adjourned.